here may well have been members of the resort that I showed you guys earlier. So I'm going to move right through what got me into this because we're pressed for time. That's an island that, again, I wish I had more time to tell you about. And hey, there's Hershey. So the thing with Hershey that was really interesting to me was, as I mentioned, I mean, I grew up in this town. I went to Hershey Middle School. I moved to the Lebanon area after middle school, so for most of my high school I was in Cedar Crest. But still, I mean, I grew up in this area. My dad worked there. He worked in the IT, so he wasn't in the factory proper, but certainly I remember going by there all the time, and that was really kind of upsetting and heartbreaking going through that. I mean, I try not to, every time I put up a Hershey picture, there's so much back and forth about people getting like really mad. Oh, they're moving all the jobs to Mexico. No, they have the plant out in West Hershey, and that's where they moved them to. So I really try and stay away from all of that, because for me, it's more about, what the factory itself was. I don't really, I know everybody kind of has their feelings one way or another about that, and I think that removing them from the discussion, it is just very sad that the building is gone. I mean, when you look at this, I think a lot of communities are dealing with this. You have the factories and the industries that were the definition of the town, the reason that it had the name that it did. And then they get torn down, or they go out of business, and then it's sort of like, what is that community after that? Well, again, there's the West Hershey plant, so I think Hershey's not in, as dire condition as, say, somewhere like, when I did my my MFA in Rochester, and that was the year that Kodak really just, plowed into the side of the mountain in flames. And, they had already been on the way down, but that was when they had kind of the patent fire sale. Yeah. So, you look at places like this, and, I could give you long lists of towns that were named after these industries that were, part of their, their core identity, and then they're sort of left with nothing after they, I wouldn't say nothing. Nothing is maybe a little melodramatic, but obviously it's a really tough thing. And I know in Rochester, the year after I left, they had a symposium where they were talking about how they were going to, what is Rochester's identity now? And one of the professors that I had was talking about, reinventing it as a arts-centered community. And I often think of the arts as kind of like the, the hippie friend that crashes on your couch or something for a while. Like I'm in the arts, so but they don't pay the rent. They're exciting and interesting and may have fun things to say about things, but they're not going to support the whole town. You kind of need industry paying the bills to support an arts community that really thrives, because otherwise, where are people going to have the money to support it? So anyway, that's getting off topic, but one of the things that really struck me when I was photographing the plant, and I'm sure many of you who have background or may have worked there or known people that work there, you know how this stuff works much better than I do. I mean, I am, even though I grew up in the area, I'm a bit of a tourist when it comes to the actual process and how things are made. But the thing that struck me was, I don't expect that I'm going to go in and it would look like, Willy Wonka's chocolate factory or anything like that, but it really does. I mean, you look at these pictures and you really can see it had kind of like a chemical plant look to it, but instead of pipes that said ammonia on them, it would say special dark or crackle. You look here, that's the syrup bottle staging area. They had the railroad area where they came in, that was just fantastic. I mean, those were such neat buildings, they really were. And actually, I have to say that, in coming in to give this presentation today, it was the first time I drove by where that had been. That's just like, I can't get over that. It's like I can see to the other side of town through the hole where it was. I thought that was interesting too. I mean, that area was just about pitch black, but the planning area, just sad. And then that was looking out over what the actual demolition scene was at the time. So, I don't know what happened to all of like the conches and things like that. I know they had an auction, and so I arrived after the auction, so there were a lot of things that may have been moved out from them, but there was still quite a bit that was left in the buildings. And yeah, like I said, just heartbreaking, because a lot of the other places, I'm a bit of a voyeur and other communities' losses, you know, but this was you know, something that I thought was very very personal to me, and just, you know, really heart-wrenching going through and seeing all these little details that were there. Hershey, by the way, is not in the book. I probably I'm already in the works to put together a follow-up to it. So, what's that?
The Hershey book?
Well, I probably won't have a book solely on Hershey, but it'll probably be like a chapter in the next one that I do. You can see that's Chocolate Avenue right over there. This was interesting too. These machines where they were making the kisses, they had the thing that I thought was, again, you know, kind of one of those things where you're like, oh, you know, the kisses that they were making there, you know, the little paper that sticks out of the top of them, all of them said aloha, you know, which is like hello or goodbye. Yeah, so I don't know what was going on with the aloha kisses, but it was just sort of a sad and sort of creepy thing, I guess, to see. Yeah, this was the area where the Kisses production was. It was in the middle of winter. You could see it was very, very cold there. Another thing that was kind of interesting to me was just, and this is going to sound so dopey, so don't think less of me, please. But the other thing that was really interesting, I thought about it, was that, you know, I had gone through the Chocolate World ride when I was a kid, like a million and a half times. I worked. Chocolate World was one of my first jobs, actually. Was a sandwich artist there. But anyway, yeah, right. So I got to hear the song all the time through the wall. Kind of drives you insane after a while. But this was before it was like the, you know, the cows and all that stuff there. I mean, that was when they had like the models of the, you know, kind of the conches and the rollers and everything like that. And it was just like a little weird deja vu going through the plant and seeing these things in actuality that I had sort of seen the representations of when I went through the, you know, Chocolate World. But yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna leave on that note. Thank you very much for coming out. I have you know, books and stuff back there. If you want to get them, I'll be around to sign them. And I am here for your questions now. And thank you for being patient and sticking with me. I didn't mean to talk longer than I thought I would, but you know. You have a question?
Do you have trouble from the owners getting in? Do they make you sign something that says, you know, if you fall through the floors and, you know, that they're not liable? Or?
Did everybody hear the question?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I mean, it's always a challenge, I get turned down more than I get thumbs up for a lot of places, and a lot of them are really heartbreaking. I mean, there have been a lot of places that I was really excited about and worked really, really hard to get permission to, and then it gets deep six. But you know, each place is kind of different in that sense. There are some places like one of the really early ones that I photographed was the Raybestos plant in Mannheim. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. I mean, it's a big asbestos factory, and I had permission. I went in there. I didn't have a respirator, you know. I think I probably breathed so much, you know, various toxins, asbestos, that I don't know. Maybe I'll get superpowers one day. That's how it works, right? But yeah, anyway, I mean, that was a case where you have a literal asbestos factory, and I just got the okay and went in. And then there are other places that I've had to go through all sorts of ridiculous things to get people to let me in, and it's not in bad condition at all.
Do you sometimes wear a mask or a respirator?
I'm nowhere near as good as I should be. You know, this is something that, I mean, I'm not really expecting to live forever anyway. I will say that, but the one place that I remember I I sort of broke down with on that was the Garmin Opera House, because it smelled so bad that it was like I have to wear a mask with this. It literally smells like you're breathing the breath out of death's mouth, you know. So, questions? Yes.
In Rochester, did you photograph some of the Kodak buildings before they started dibbling down?
So the question was, did I get to photograph the Kodak buildings? I did not, actually. They had torn down a good number of the Kodak buildings. Yeah. There was somebody else that did a really neat series on it that I was very jealous of. Because they did. The administration building is beautiful. I would have loved to have gone there. I did get to see the like some of the newer like employee cafeteria and like their IT center, but it really wasn't very exciting. It was kind of like more modern, generic construction. And it wasn't like really decayed, so it was just sort of an empty building. But yeah, that was about as good as it got for that. I think I kind of missed the boat by a year or three with Kodak, or else I could have got in there. But I don't know. I mean, their administration building, I don't know what condition that's in. I know that it's really, really difficult to get them to agree to anything because, as many people are, they're very worried about tarnishing their image. But at this point, they're kind of non-existent. So. Yes.
I'm just curious about equipment in those dark buildings. Do you ever bring like standalone floodlights or anything, or is it all just off your flash?
There was one instance last year where I photographed a theater and they had floodlights that were in there. But other than that, it's almost entirely existing light. I mean, the Opera House that I was talking about, I had to use an off-camera flash in it and then light painting. But I really have to travel pretty light with a lot of these places, so it's usually like whatever I can carry in a backpack and then the tripod. And I try and keep that as light as possible, which I am not tremendously good at, but yeah, so somebody else had, both you and me.
Are you planning on doing any more workshops?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so he asked if I'm planning on doing any more workshops. Just to plug that real quick. I teach photography workshops throughout the year. I get people access to some of the places that I've been in, like if you were watching that, last year and the year before we did a bunch in Scranton, Lace, and they're all legit, all with permission from the owners, all have, at least one waiver that you have to sign so that if anything ever happens to you, you will not even think about blaming me. But they're a lot of fun. They're a really nice group of people, and it is a business. I always tell people first and foremost, I cannot afford to put the amount of time and effort that it goes into out of the goodness of my heart. It is something that, I do have to treat as a business. But that being said, it's usually about 40 to 50% of the profits go back into the sites, into either preservation or even maintenance. So within the last 2 years, that raised over $50,000 for the various places. I mean, not $50,000 for like one of them, $50,000 for all of them. And when you're talking about building maintenance, I realize that's kind of a drop in the bucket, even that whole amount there. But it's something, and usually it's been a really positive experience. The Lansdowne Theater was another one that we've done several photography workshops at, and they've been, like I said, really fun. So I don't have them up yet, but they are on my website, Abandoned America, and they should be getting announced by the end of the month. So another week or so. Yes?
You photographed the from steel plant before it was torn down.
I did. It's not in that book. Probably will be in the second book. I mean, unfortunately, that was a lot earlier on in my photographing, so it was, I would not say it's up to the quality that I would like it to be, but yes, I did get to photograph that before the sands took over and kind of obliterated it. So, yeah, and actually one of the workshops that I do is there's a building that is one of the former Bethlehem Steel buildings that we can go into, and the building itself is interesting, but it's more like a warehouse, so they have all sorts of things like locomotives, and they have some of the Bethlehem Steel fire trucks, and all these other sort of Bethlehem Steel bric-a-brac, and then there's like an old pump house that is not related to Bethlehem Steel, but we usually break it up into two. That's the Steam and Steel Workshop, so we can still get in there, but yeah, I was there 2 or 3 times before they closed, and that was just amazing. I mean, that was one of the sort of 7 industrial wonders of the world. They have this gas blowing room, that if I can ever do a workshop there, oh, it would be the most wonderful thing, because they're just the most magnificent machines you would ever see in your life. So, very cool stuff. Other questions?
Did you
Yes?
ever get Mickers Distillery there in Shaverstown? When that was
Ryan, my good friend Ryan actually went out there with me a long time ago. I don't know what the condition of it is now. It's gone.
the car is pretty much everything, just in one building.
Okay. That was extremely early when I was photographing. So those will probably never ever be in a book. They aren't even up on my website because they're largely very good. But yes, I was there. I was there.
We were in there one time, poking around.
Yeah, but yeah. So yes, to answer your question, yes, I was there. Other questions, you and then you.
Do you think we're doing a better job preserving some of the buildings? I mean, is your sense the trend is going in the right direction?
So for anybody that didn't hear, the question was, are we doing a better job at preserving? I think yes and no. I think that there are a lot of people that are getting more interested in it. I think there's maybe a growing awareness of how many places that we're losing. But the thing is that I think money is still on the side of tearing everything down. And you know, there are a lot of reasons for that. I think one reason is because essentially what you're seeing happening with a lot of these places is you have just an enormous chunk of money that goes into demolishing them, often at taxpayer expense. So you have taxpayers paying to demolish these buildings. There's all these metals and other things that are getting salvaged out of them. That's also a big chunk of money. And then there's redevelopment, which is a huge chunk of money too. So I think you have a very clear, and a lot of this is usually at taxpayer expense, which I have to believe if it's being decided on a county or city level that, you know, perhaps there's money that's being bounced back to the politicians that are making the decisions about it. I mean, you know, if I had more time, I could go into like Greystone State Hospital in Jersey and Chris Christie's decisions to tear that down despite preservation plans for it, which are all very sort of mystifying until you think, well, money, you know. And then it makes a lot more sense. Because you have people that want to keep it there in the community, that have plans for rehabilitating it. And I think it's the same thing with the Bethlehem Steel in Lackawanna, New York. So, and this is why you'll see places, like I remember an article about this really beautiful old courthouse that was still in use. It was still a functional building, and they tore down a functional courthouse that was just a beautiful historic building and then rebuilt it. And again, doesn't make sense until you start to think, well, you know, this is a lot of money that gets passed around a lot of hands to tear these places down, strip them out, and then rebuild them. So, I mean, you know, I can't say that in every case, but the problem is that when you talk about like preservation groups, on the other hand, and I love them. I mean, they're you know, I'm friends with a lot of people in a lot of preservation groups, but they are not the people that are rolling around in the sort of money that developers are, that demolition companies are. So, yeah, I mean, I could tell you a lot of stories that, again, are really kind of funny until you think, well, somebody probably got paid off on that. So I guess to answer your question, I think there's more awareness of it, but I also think it's still a pretty dire situation, and I think the bullseye is on a lot of, you know, a lot of historically significant buildings like that, and the battle is kind of a day-by-day, community-by-community thing. But you know, the importance of saving them, I mean, there are a lot of places that people don't realize were on the shopping block. I think, now, somebody out here is probably going to correct me on it, but I thought there was a point where there was a possibility of the Hershey Theater. No, maybe not. I don't know. I had thought that I had heard about the theater. I know that what's that?
I think at one time.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish I knew more about that. I know the Paramount Theater in Austin was abandoned for a while, and there was talk about tearing it down. That's like one of the most beautiful theaters you'd ever see. Ellis Island, the part that the museum is in, that was abandoned for a while, and they're, you know, currently working to restore the other part of the island. So when you look at these places, there are a lot of buildings that have, you know, their head in the chopping block, so to speak. And it was only through vision and people fighting for them that they managed to survive, and then they become kind of cultural icons that nobody can imagine losing. But other questions?
Have you ever done anything with the Penhurst property?
I did. I did workshops out there last year. Actually, you were at one. I think it was the last one I did for the season too. Yeah, I don't know if I'm going to be doing them again this year or not. The property is kind of in limbo. I've heard talk of it being sold in a tax sale last fall. So if that's the case, I wouldn't even know who or how to go about doing that. I'm sort of currently trying to figure out. But yeah, I photographed that when it was just a wilderness, and then I photographed it when they started doing the, mulching all the trees in the property and trying to bring it back, and then we did the workshops there. So somebody back here had one? Yes.
You said that it's very dark in most of these places, there's not much available light, so are the images long exposures, are they HDRs, are they layered in Photoshop, how are they done?
So basically, they're long exposures, and without getting too far into the camera nerdery, but answering your question, I used to do HDR, which is basically where you take multiple exposures and then kind of smash them together with the computer to get one theoretically well exposed. But I think those look a lot more processed than I want. So what I started doing was taking multiple exposures and then painting the different areas kind of into one picture. So, you'd have one exposure for the room, and then one exposure for outside the window, and then one area is in shadow, and you can kind of paint in the details from the different exposures. I mean, it's a lot of fun, that process, because you can kind of get something that has the look of natural light, but gives you the ability to go far beyond the dynamic range a camera has. Other questions? Yes.
Did you notice anything in any of your travels that was as intricate as the Hershey Kiss wrapping machinery?
I've been to a lot of industrial facilities, so I feel in a way that I must have, but I'm also drawing a blank to say specifically. I mean, like I said, I've been to a lot of industrial facilities. I think that maybe some of the ones that I've been to that would rival it or other are places that were chemical plants. I mean, that's why I think, because they had a lot of like the tubes and vats and things like that. That's why I think of that. But there were two places that were dye plants that I went to. Sort of side note that was interesting about them is that I didn't realize that they basically use chemical weapons to make indigo dye. Phosphenes, is they had all these warning signs for phosphine. The one place that I went to, and if this klaxon is going off, then get in a hazmat suit or you'll die. So I looked at my phone to see what phosphenes were, because obviously being in that plant, it was of interest to me. Basically it turned out that was one of the first chemical weapons that was ever used. It was in World War I, and what I read was that it smelled like freshly mown grass for a summer day, and then you asphyxiate and die. So after that, they've, I guess, moved to much more effective murder weapons, but that's still used in dye production. So if you were going to open up your own dye plant, you would have to register with the UN because you had stuff that could potentially be used to. Anyway, that's getting a little bit detoured, but that I would say is one of the things, at least in terms of the buildings, that might rival it on complexity. I think the other thing would be the cold breakers, because that is just one big machine that you're in. I mean, the whole thing is a machine. But I also don't know if you're talking about maybe more on the small scale of, the kiss wrapping machines, that's a little bit more like kind of detail-y. But yeah, I'd have to think about that. Yes?
You ever done anything defunct amusement parks, roller coasters?
I did photograph Willow Grove not too long after they had closed. Not some of my best stuff. And I'm hoping that this year there's one or two places that I have my eye on, but not yet. So aside from Willow Grove, and Willow Grove, like I said, I got some interesting stuff, but that was kind of in the pre-skill with a camera range of my life. Yes?
Don't you have Williams Grove on there? I thought you had a couple pictures of Williams Grove.
I do. I have one or two pictures. I don't have a dedicated gallery to it.
Right,
I think
so
I
I
just
noticed
got.
the coaster.
Yeah.
You can walk right to that. On Sundays they have a flea market there.
Well, they used to. They don't anymore. They have the flea market
Oh,
somewhere
that's
else.
right. That moved over
Yeah.
across there.
Because that was when I went there. Was
Right.
I went to the flea market, and then I went and walked around and took pictures, and then when I went back to do it again, they didn't have the flea market there, and they have
Yeah.
those signs that are on the bridge that have like the skull and crossbones and like don't trespass, and they have the speedway right across the way, so it's
Right.
not like you can really be inconspicuous there.
Right,
You had a question?
Yeah. Has there ever been a property that you've done a lot of research on, you got there, and whether there's been too many squatters, police, or anything, you just decided to just give up on?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's, it is a type of photography that is fraught with disappointment, you know, because there are a lot of times, and there have been, actually, the amusement park question, there was one that I went across the country to photograph and I wasn't able to. I mean, I got other things when I was in that area. Usually you learn to plan backups on a trip, but that was the jewel of my eye, and I have yet to go there again because it was just so far away and such a pain in the neck to get to. But yeah, that happens a fair amount. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you very much.